Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, providing more than 41,000 jobs in the production of wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details at choosewood.com.
St. Louis Public Radio's The Gateway gives you the day's news first thing every weekday morning. From the ever-evolving relationship between St. Louis City and County to developments in the Missouri and Illinois state capitals and reports from our correspondents in Rolla and the Metro East. We put it all in a roughly 10-minute package with clarity and context. Download The Gateway wherever you get podcasts.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is St. Louis on the Air.
I mean, I guess it's also what's kind of great about writing is that there's always this sense of you've taken something from 0 all the way to 100.
But no, Miggy is not a sociopath. She's just a kind of alive, sparking little girl.
All these kind of central core questions that even though we think of them as being adult questions, they really begin to brew in the mind of young children.
I'm Sarah Fensky. Two 7-year-olds forge a fast friendship in 1973. Margaret Brenneman is better known as Miggy. She is loud and reckless and goes to public school. Ellen Gallagher is careful and polite and goes to Catholic school. But they are inseparable until suddenly they are separated. Marisa Silver's new novel, The Mysteries, paints an indelible portrait of each girl. But more than that, it paints a portrait of St. Louis in 1973. Miggy lives in Maplewood. Ellen lives in Webster Groves. And through their stories, Marisa Silver tells our story. And she joins us today. Marisa Silver, welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So, Marisa, what made you interested in writing a novel about 7-year-old girls?
7-year-old girls, I guess it's a fascinating age to me because it's an age where you can both believe in magic and also know something about the real world and how things work. And so I wanted to kind of capture a transitional moment, particularly for one girl, Miggy, the main character of the novel, as sort of reality begins to dawn on her and as she begins to put together some of maybe the more harsh realities of life. But it's also it's just a wonderful age where you can believe in monsters and also understand that monsters don't really exist at the same time. You can hold both those things in your mind.
So Miggy, she's such a great character. She almost leaps off the page for me. Did you draw on a particular person in real life as you were creating her?
No, not at all. But Miggy, not only, I'm glad she leapt off the page, she leapt into my imagination in the same way. She just kind of, I began to conjure this 7-year-old girl, and I knew that she was going to be sort of unruly and someone who was pushing at the limits of being 7, who didn't sort of accept the fact that she couldn't do or say or be all the ways that she wanted to be. And then Miggy just kind of appeared for me, and I just knew her instantly. I understood her energy and her frustrations and how she loved and how she fought, and she was really sort of a complete character, which is not that doesn't happen very often for me.
I was surprised to see, and I shouldn't really put any stock into what people say on Goodreads, but every now and then I browse it, and I saw somebody who'd reviewed the book there suggested she was a budding sociopath, and that was not my sense of Miggy at all. And I'm wondering, since, hey, I have the author here, did I miss some clues that you were throwing out here?
No, not at all. But the great thing about writing a book is that people read it differently, and people bring to it their own associations and their own life experience. And that kind of is the complete book. But no, Miggy is not a sociopath. She's sort of an alive, energetic, kind of fierce little girl. And I think we meet children of all stripes. And, I think in this moment in time, we tend to medicalize the way kids are a lot more than people did in 1973. We tend to try to diagnose and label. I don't think that was happening to the same degree back then. But no, Miggy is not a sociopath. She's just a kind of alive, sparking little girl.
And yeah, it feels like today somebody might try to say she has ADHD, but my sense is this is a girl she's going to be just fine. She might be a difficult child, but she's difficult in a good way.
I am not hearing.
Marisa, Can you hear me? No. It sounds like we suddenly...
I'm not hearing anything.
Marisa, we're going to call you right back. And I think Marisa cannot hear us. So, unfortunately, we're going to get her right back. We're talking today to the novelist Marisa Silver about her book, The Mysteries, a book that I enjoyed so much. And this is a great story of two 7-year-olds and the friendship they form in 1973 St. Louis. We're talking about the character Miggy, who's sort of the main character here in the book, and her friendship with another 7-year-old named Ellen. This book is also a lot about St. Louis, and that is something we're going to talk to Marisa about the minute that we get her back. In the meantime, while we're looking for her, I'm going to let you know about something we're planning to do on Monday, something that we want to hear from you. This has to do with working from home. If you've been working from home during this pandemic, we want to know how you feel about returning to the office. And if you're the boss, do you think working from home has worked? You can leave us a voicemail with your first name and where you're calling from on our dedicated voicemail line. That's 314-516-6397. Again, that voicemail line is 314-516-6397. I understand Marisa Silver is back. Yes, can you hear me?
I am back. Sorry about that. Technical difficulties of some kind.
I tell you, the remote aspect of radio in this pandemic, it does us in. But here you are, and that is great. And so we were talking about Miggy, and the fact that this is not a budding sociopath. This is just a normal 7-year-old girl. I also want to talk about...
I mean, she's she's just a vibrant, unruly girl.
So in addition to painting the portrait of these two girls, of Miggy and her friend Ellen, you set this novel in 1973 St. Louis, and the city did not feel incidental in any way. This felt like St. Louis was a big part of what this book was about. What made you decide, as somebody who's based in Los Angeles, to set a novel here in St. Louis?
Well, I think probably the main reason to set it in the Midwest at all is because that's where I was a child. I wasn't a child in St. Louis. I was a child in Ohio. But I think that my sense memories and my feeling for that period of my childhood is very much colored by my life in Ohio. But in fact, St. Louis is a city that I've grown to know and love over decades because it's where my husband is from. And so I've spent an enormous amount of time in the city and become fascinated by its beauty and its architecture and its history. And so it just felt like a really fertile place for me to set this novel.
So we should mention your husband is Ken Kwapis, who's actually been a guest on this show. He wrote a very good book of his own about being a director. As during your time in St. Louis with Ken and visiting his family, did you end up picking out specific homes and specific buildings for some of these characters?
I think I made a couple of trips to St. Louis while I was writing the novel, and in that time I actually did drive around to the particular neighborhoods I was writing about and chose, homes that looked right, and then just, included them in my imaginary universe of St. Louis. So yes, I found particular places, but I didn't, then blended it in my imagination.
So there's a passage in this book that just felt so spot on, both for the characters you're writing about and for the city of St. Louis. And I'm hoping that you can read an excerpt of this for us today. This is a part where it's telling us about Julian, who is the father of Miggy, the little girl who's kind of front and center in this story. Marisa, if you could take it from there.
Absolutely. Julian runs a hardware store that his father began. So this passage picks him up when he's driving some equipment that he's renting over to the person who's rented it. As he drives a pressure washer over to the Illinois side, he feels affection for the blighted city where he's lived most his life. When he was Miggy's age, St. Louis felt no bigger than his patch of front yard, its breadth no greater than the distance he stood from his upstairs neighbor, Ben Mandelstam, when they tossed a baseball back and forth deep into summer evenings. The world grew larger on Sunday afternoons after Julian was released from the purgatory of Hebrew school and bar mitzvah preparations. He would ride in the back seat of the blue Plymouth while his father drove the family through the city. Maurice Brenneman kept his window down even in winter so that he could more readily point out the Fox Theater or the copper dome of the old courthouse with pride, as if the city's civic amplitude lent stature to his life. Julian knew about Yankee Stadium and Wrigley Field, but it was impossible to imagine any venue more majestic than Busch Stadium or a team worthier of his allegiance than the Cardinals. Their losses inspired a faith much more meaningful than any he was taught about by the rabbis because, as his father told him when the cards were coming from behind, at any moment they could turn it around. If his mother came into the living room while he and his father were watching a game, Julian would beg her to leave, knowing that her sheer presence and her unbearably pointless commentary would cause his team to lose. He believed in all this, in the centrality of his city, in his cardinals, in his father, and the small hardware store on Olive that declared the importance of his family name to anyone who drove by and saw the sign. What Julian remembers from the long-ago rides was the unified color and texture of so many brick structures fixed in his young mind a palpable idea of home. The fortress-like factories made him understand that St. Louis was built for industry and for people who made things. If his father's claim on the place was not enough to convince Julian that St. Louis shouldered the great weight of history, then the brick did the job.
That's just a beautiful passage, and I feel like it describes the St. Louis I know so well. You're also talking about belief in that part, this belief in your city and the belief that you can almost control a baseball game by your superstitions. I'm wondering if that ties into the title of the book, The Mysteries. I think of the phrase, the mysteries of faith.
Well, I love that you say that. And, the mysteries are various, and I think that what the title refers to is sort of the unanswerable questions that we all have to confront in our lives, and the ones that, in particular, Miggy is beginning to confront through the course of this novel that have to do with life and death and faith and disbelief and all these kind of central core questions that, even though we think of them as being adult questions, they really begin to brew in the mind of young children. So, yeah, I think belief is one of those questions. Ellen's family is Catholic and very faith-based, and Miggy's family is Jewish, but they don't practice their faith, and so the girls are both sort of trying to understand what God means or what he doesn't mean. So yes, all those mysteries.
So in addition to sort of these questions of faith, one of the great themes that feels like it's running through this book is the sense of the city being hollowed out, the white flight making suburbs out of what was once farmland, and how that affects the people who are left behind and the people who choose to leave. How much was that on your mind as you were telling this story?
Very much. I mean, obviously, a lot of the history of the city has to do with, or at least in the 20th century, has to do with what happened during that period when so many people moved to the suburbs and the outskirts and even across the river. And that sense of a hollow core, which, now is obviously much more vibrant and has come back to life, I think in the 70s was very much there. And I think, all across this country, I mean, in 1973, there was a recession. And I think, inner cities, post-industrial, cities that no longer could rely on their industry were really suffering in that same way that St. Louis did. And so it sort of, and I think I chose it because it sort of provides an emotional backdrop for this story. There's this kind of sense of decline and uncertainty. Is what is the historic backdrop for the story, and certainly informs the lives of the characters in it.
So Miggy's dad, Julian, he has this hardware store in University City, and he refuses to sell to a developer, even though the rest of the block is moving out. What do you think makes him so intent on staying in the city when everybody else seems to be picking up stakes?
Emotion. I mean, as much as he has, difficulties with his father, I think that the store represents for him a kind of way of being fixed to a place that makes one feel secure and that makes you feel like you know who you are. So I think that there's that going on for him, and I also think there's just kind of a more political rebellion against the sort of defacing of the small mom and pop shops that happen so often when these developers come in and swoop in and kind of erase an area. But mostly for him, it's just he's a guy who's in a very uncertain place in his life, especially in regards to what happens in the story. And I think that the one thing he can count on is this location that his father began, that is sort of the locus of his life.
There's another great passage in here that deals with that. I'm going to just read this couple paragraphs here. You write, "He has no illusions. One day he'll give up. He imagines what it will feel like to walk away, the wreckage that was once Brenneman and Sons at his back. He imagines Miggy and Jean by his side, standing at the landing. He can describe to Miggy a time when St. Louis was nothing but a small settlement by the river. He can paint a picture of how it grew from cobblestone streets into this place that teeters in the hopeful, hopeless balance between decay and renewal. Maybe one day she'll be old enough to understand how the city's heart beats, fractured and fractious, just like his own." I just love that passage. And, Julian is a character who dreams of escaping, but he also feels so rooted to this city. Miggy, she's someone who you seem to understand inside and out. Do you think she'll be equally rooted to St. Louis?
Oh, well, that's a question I don't know the answer to. People often think about, what happens after a story ends, but it's something I actually never think about. I think that the story exists in the moment that I've written it, and then I kind of don't extrapolate beyond that. So I don't know. I think Miggy's going to, I think no matter where Miggy lived, she would bust out of there. I think Miggy is someone she's going to be restless in her life. If I had to guess, I think there's going to be a restless part of her nature that makes her sort of go beyond where she's been.
Maybe some of the dreams that her parents had that end up being unrealized, these are things she's going to realize for herself by hook or by crook.
Yeah.
I also love
her parents, I'm sorry, go on.
Oh, no, please go on.
Oh, I was just saying what you're referring to, her parents when they were younger, they were growing up in the 60s, and they had great ambitions to lead sort of more bohemian lives in the coastal cities they were reading about, and they ended up back for a number of reasons in the area that they grew up in. And Julian certainly taking over his father's business, which is not anywhere near what they fantasized about. And I was kind of interested in how people become who they are, and how we sort of make not just how it's not about settling, it's about an acceptance of how we become the people that we become. And that's kind of what they're going through as a couple, is trying to square the fantasy that they once had about their lives and the reality of their lives, and then trying to capture what is magical about that.
So one of the other things I wanted to make sure to ask you about today, the relationships between these daughters and their mothers were just so well told, and they just hit me to my core as someone who's the mother of a couple daughters. And in researching you, I learned your mother had been a pioneering director, and this was at a time when so few women were able to do anything in Hollywood. Did you draw on your relationship with her when you were writing about these characters and how they felt about their mothers?
I was not at all drawing on my relationship with my mother. It was a very different relationship that I had with her than the girls had with their mothers. But it's certainly something, I think about a lot. Is what does it mean to be a mother? How does a mother and a child impact one another? A parent doesn't only impact a child impacts a parent. And it's a subject that I've returned to in a number of different novels, and it's something that, is just sort of endlessly rich and fascinating to me. Both of the little girls have very different relationships with their mothers, fought for different reasons. And I guess what I'm interested in is sort of understanding that love is not just this blanket positive thing, that it's filled with all sorts of ambivalences and emotions, and that's what love is.
So this is your 7th novel that you've now released to the world. Does writing get easier as you continue to write more fiction?
That is the great question. It doesn't, which is so galling.
That is galling.
In certain ways, yes, because I have, I have more facility with my craft. I've practiced it more. I've become more sophisticated, I think, in certain ways about thinking about it. But every story requires its own way of being shaped and told. And so in a funny way, every time I start writing something new, it's almost like I have to reinvent the wheel all over again, because, no two stories are alike. They don't want to be told the same way. They don't, want to be shaped the same way. So, I guess it's also what's kind of great about writing is that there's always this sense of you've taken something from 0 all the way to 100 each time. And so that's kind of satisfying, although also hard and frustrating.
I guess my brain is still stuck on the fact that once you're done with your characters, once you finish the book, you're really done with them. I mean, you've created this whole world. You get it to 100. You're really able to close that door and walk away and move to the next story.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I conceive of a story, it sort of it's bounded. I wanted to write about these people during this particular moment in their lives. And I didn't choose to write about them at another moment in their lives for a reason. For me, the emotional nexus of their story happened right then. That was, what happened in this novel is the reason to tell their story. So I don't think that there's nothing, in my mind, I'm not inventing dramas for Mickey at age 20. That's not what's compelling me. What compelled me was what happened to her at age 7.
So that book is The Mysteries by Marisa Silver. Sounds like there will be no sequel, but this was a wonderful book. I really enjoyed it. I think everyone in St. Louis and frankly everyone should read this book. So Marisa Silver, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so pleased to be here.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri, St. Louis.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association. Missouri produces wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details on the variety of products made in the state are at choosewood.com.